And welcome to another edition of the Ramsey Dewey Podcast. Today we have Matt from Reality Check Self-Defense, one of the greatest, perhaps most underrated channels on YouTube. If you like self-defense, if you like trying out ridiculous self-defense videos that don't work, like I've made some of these that have been very popular on my channel. Matt does these, but he takes them to another level. In fact, let's talk about that for a minute. Like, I did a lot of these self-defense videos, like somebody comes up to you with a knife and you do some like goofy karate chop thing and they're like, or whatever. And, you know, my friend Jordan would just come and just stab everybody, sewing machine style. And it was this running gag for a while, but Matt, you took it up to this whole new level where you endure intense physical punishment. I don't know how else to describe it. Like you put your body on the line to, I mean, you've suffered some injuries, and could you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what are some of the worst injuries that you have suffered trying out some of these self-defense techniques?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our good friend Master Wong put out a couple of videos about how to use keys as a self-defense weapon, and I think to this point, throughout all the videos I made, the worst one by far would probably be where the technique in question was to take a key and scratch it across the hand to try to get someone to let go of a bear hug. So I went out on the street and I offered people $50. I'll put them in a bear hug as tight as I possibly can. And if they could slash me to make me let go, I would give them $50. So I went and did that with about 5 or 6 different people. No one could make me let go. But at the end of the day, I had like humongous lacerations all over the back of my hands. So blood dripping everywhere, and I still have some scars from it. You probably won't be able to see it on camera, but that has to be the worst one. Other than that, I also did like the Wolverine with the keys in between the knuckles, self-defense.
Yes, the discount Wolverine key thing, yes.
Yeah, so I put my hand out to try to block my face, and the key just went straight into the palm of my hand. So that wasn't ideal. I kind of called that test there. I'd say those two are probably the worst injuries. Other than that, I've got like whipped with keys in the back. That was painful, but no blood. So definitely the hand lacerations would have to be the worst.
Yeah, man, it's one thing when you have a rubber knife like this and you're getting stabbed with it and you laugh like, he would have been killed 17 times over right there. But, you know, it's another thing where you're actually testing out the viability of a real weapon. And that's man, again, that's one of the reasons I say you're one of the unsung heroes of the YouTube martial arts self-defense genre, man. So let's talk about some of these terrible self-defense videos, because there are so many of them, like so many.
There are a lot.
And one thing both you and I say a lot in our videos is, you know, essentially train for real, learn how to fight, take a fighting class. Don't just take somebody's word for it, test it out. Why do you think, Matt, that so many people make these bad self-defense videos that are so easily debunked simply by trying it against mild resistance? Not even crazy, wild tests where you're scratching yourself with keys, but just mild resistance. But they still put this stuff out. Why does this happen?
I think I can actually completely understand why it happens, because I used to be on the other side of the spectrum, where I would not only heavily believe this stuff, but I would actually teach it to people. I didn't have my own gym, but I went to a very traditional karate gym, and I would teach similar kind of techniques and tactics to the new people that came to the gym, just like you do when you have a new partner. And I think it all essentially stems from the desire to want to conquer the bully, or, you know, feel the ability to be able to defend yourself. And there's 2 ways you can go with this. You can put yourself in a situation where you actually have to defend yourself, or you can find someone who seems like they know what they're talking about. Of course, you don't have the ability to decide whether or not they do, because you yourself don't know much about fighting, and then go to them for advice. And if they just happen to give you bad advice, it's like kind of luck of the draw, because you don't know it's bad advice, and then you learn it, and then you're like, this is good. I've learned this for the last 5 years and got my black belt. I'll now teach this. But it just never appears to these people to try to test it, because their sensei told them, and now their sensei told them, and now they're telling someone else. And it's just like this unbreakable cycle of just bizarreness that I don't even have a word to describe.
Yeah.
And now that I'm on the other side of it, and I think that's something we can talk about later, how I got to the other side of it. But now that I'm on the other side of it, I just look back at it and I'm like, how the heck did I teach this stuff to people and think this was something that would help them defend themselves? So I guess the short answer would be it comes from a combination of a desire to want to beat the bully, combined with a lack of ability to tell the difference between good and bad.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So, Matt, how did you get into this self-defense thing that you're doing right now? How did you make that? How did you initially get into martial arts and self-defense, and how did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, good question. I was bullied pretty heavily throughout both primary school and high school, which naturally led to me wanting to try out learning how to defend myself. So in primary school, kids would take my bag and throw it off the balcony. Slowly progressed up to high school. People would essentially hold me down, threaten to break my legs, literally just punch me in the back of the head on the school bus. So in primary school, I went to traditional karate, trained there for about 8 to 9 years, I think. And eventually I got to year 8. I was walking home from the bus stop, and this one kid who had been bullying me for the last probably 2 to 3 months, we'll say, he was just throwing sticks at the back of my head, and I was like, you know what? That's it. I'm going to have my Karate Kid moment where I turn around and I finally conquer the demon. So I turned around, I got in horse stance, and I went to throw a big crescent kick and do all these spinning kicks, and he just threw me to the floor and beat the crap out of me, essentially. So I stood up after that, and I was like, what the heck? And I went back to training that weekend and told my instructor what happened, and his advice was just, you didn't do the technique right. And I was just thinking,
oh, man.
There's something not clicking here. So naturally, I went to do mixed martial arts and Muay Thai and all of the kind of more practical aspects. Not that karate can't be practical. I think it certainly can. But my particular one definitely wasn't. And then I quickly realized, okay, this stuff works. Eventually, I got into another fight with a bigger, badder bully, won that one, and that kind of solidified it for me. And I was like, all right, now I know how to actually handle myself. And it was quite anticlimactic that time, because I literally just landed a single jab, and then he ran away crying, and I was like, man, I spent so long preparing for this moment on such a journey, and this is the final boss.
Man, I had a similar moment, just getting beaten up and teased and just thrown into the dirt and all these horrible things like you're talking about as a child. And I remember my brothers and I, there were no martial arts schools around, so I checked out all the books on fighting and martial arts and boxing and wrestling and judo and everything I could find, and just studied, and we would practice and spar in our yard. And then one day, the bully came up to me, this guy who'd just been tormenting me my whole life. Mm-hmm. And he throws a sloppy punch, and all I did was stick up my arm and block the punch. And he backs down, and he's like, whoa, Dewey's a fighter. Haha, come on, guys, let's get out of here. And they'd left. Oh, man. And they never tried to fight me again. I was like, that's it? Yeah. That's it?
Right? Yeah. And it's good. I'm glad that that's as far as it had to go. But on the one hand, there's a sense of relief, but there's also a sense of disappointment, because it's that's all you got. I put in so much effort getting ready to beat you, and that's all you got. I thought you were so much tougher than that. So I'm glad that that's as far as it went for you.
Indeed, it's so much worse for a lot of other people, man. Fortunately, in my case, it was a guy who was mostly bark and very little bite. But yeah, it's funny how that works. How we, as martial artists who get into martial arts because of bullies, which is so many of us, so many people, I think even George St. Pierre, one of the greatest MMA fighters ever, got into martial arts because of bullies. And that's a very common story for UFC fighters. And, they essentially put themselves through a living hell to forge themselves into a human weapon because of some dude who probably would have just backed down if you stood up to him a little bit.
Exactly.
It's kind of alarming when you think about it.
But at the same time, I'm glad I took steps that were more than necessary, because it led me into a lifestyle, very fit and active, and I'm very passionate about now. So I'm glad that I over-prepared as opposed to under-prepared. That's for sure.
Definitely, man. Definitely. So, one of the self-defense movements that is always taught by bad self-defense instructors. In fact, almost every bad self-defense lesson I find starts with, what do you do when somebody grabs your wrist? And I'm not going to say this is something that doesn't happen, because wrist grabs, it happens during hand-to-hand combat at some point or another from time to time. But, again, this is always the first thing. What to do if somebody grabs the wrist? And that answer is almost always followed by the most absolute nonsense. Like if you had a brainstorming session to try to think of what is the stupidest way to solve the wrist grab problem, and then they elect the winner, you, sir, came up with the dumbest idea. Let's put that in the video. Why the wrist grab? Why do you think this is the go-to self-defense technique that's always taught?
I honestly have no flipping idea, Ramsey. I could not tell you. I think if self-defense systems were based off of what actually happens, that wrist grab would be like at the very bottom of the hierarchy. Because I think it happens, right? Like you said, it does happen. But never have I been assaulted with that wrist grab. Like never in the many times anyone's bullied me has that happened. Or if it has happened, it's been like for a couple of seconds. They grab my wrist and then they like throw it away. It's not the predominant attack. So I can only imagine it's a situation very similar to what you described, where it's like the martial arts instructors sit around a round table and they're like, what technique do we need to learn how to defend against? Verbal de-escalation? No, that's ridiculous. How to communicate effectively? No, God forbid. How to read social cues? No. Maybe how to have a stable stance? No. The first thing we need to teach is what if someone does this deadly move? So I don't have an answer. I honestly have no idea whatsoever.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was thinking to what you were saying before, the idea that when we give the idea, the illusion of progress, people get excited about it.
Yeah.
Like if you present somebody with an easy problem and then say, here's the easy solution, like put some force against the weak point or whatever, they're like, aha, right? And they feel like they've learned something and the instructor feels like they've taught something. So, I mean, other than that, it seems like an artificially induced, easily solvable problem. But, yeah, man, probably the only situation I can think of where that really comes up, at least has with me, as a combat sports practitioner anyway, is inside of a clinch when people are pummeling. Sometimes they'll grab a wrist to try to set up an arm drag or something, but that's not something I think I've ever seen in a street fight or a street altercation.
Yeah.
Matt, what do you think? What do you think are the most common attack situations that happen in real life self-defense situations?
Yeah, I think one of the key words that I often kind of, whenever I see your video and I pop in and I leave the comments, one of the key words that's always in there is the word context. And I think that in order to answer your question, I first have to discuss like the different context of attacks depending on who you are, right? Because who you are is going to depend on which kind of attack you're most likely to face. So when I look at, I live in Australia, in New South Wales. So when I look at who is more likely to get attacked by what, and I look at the New South Wales victim statistics, females are most likely to be attacked by someone they know in their own home, whereas males are most likely to be attacked by someone they don't know in an open place. And both of these different contexts, because when we address self-defense, I think we need to talk about the different contexts, involve very different kinds of attacks. If you're a woman in your own home, it's likely to be someone you know. And this level of escalation is likely to be very, very gradual. And what I mean when I say gradual, I mean it's not going to be someone saying, I'm going to attack you, rah! It's going to be kind of a very steady stepping up of verbal cues that gradually let you know something's not quite right here. And I think one of the most important skill sets that women need is the ability to recognize when that's happening and know what to do as soon as they recognize that something's wrong. And on the other hand, in the context of males, I can speak more to that from experience, because obviously I'm a male and I've been attacked in public places a couple of times. So I think the most common kind of attacks in males tend to happen, this is also supported by the New South Wales statistics anyway, they tend to happen in like entertainment venues, like a pub or a club or a music festival or something to that effect. And these are places that are often very alcohol fueled. So for me personally, the most salient moment I ever remember being attacked fits in perfectly with these statistics. We were waiting on the street, going to go out to have a good time. I was 18 years old, and 3 cars of guys drove past, and they beeped a horn at us, right? So me and my 2 friends, 2 of which couldn't fight or run very well to save their lives, we just kind of yelled something out back, just made a noise, like, hey, don't beep at us. So they came around in the roundabout, got out, and it started this ego battle of like pushing and shoving. So I think I can talk more about that in a second if we want to as well. But I think for males, the most common situation we face is that kind of ego battle, right? Like the pushing and shoving, and I think that's where it starts a lot of the time. And then you can draw the difference between like social and antisocial violence. And I think a lot of the violence that men face tends to be social violence, which is most of the time de-escalatable or, diffusable. Whereas for women, it tends to be more of that antisocial violence where the person has a specific intent to harm, and it's a very steady emotional kind of growth where there's signs and you need to recognize when to get out. So your question was, what do I think is the most common attack? And I think it depends who you're talking about. Who you're talking about will depend on what answer I give to that. So that was kind of a roundabout answer, but I hope that was...
No, that's a great answer, man. Context is for kings, man. Context is for kings. That reminded me so much of answers that I often give on my own YouTube channel. People ask me, what's the best martial art? What martial art should I take? And I'm like, well, that depends. What are the contexts? And it's the exact same thing here, man. I'm so glad you brought that up, because again, it's a world of difference between, say, a woman who's living with a man who may attack her, and maybe they have an argument and it escalates into something worse, and some random drunk guy on the street who thinks he's better than you and wants to start something. So let's address the latter first, specifically because like 92% of my viewers are male, and when they say self-defense, I think most of them are talking about street fights.
Yes, yeah.
And I hate that. I absolutely hate that, because street fights, in my estimation, are not self-defense. Street fights are 2 drunk guys getting mad at each other, pushing each other, saying angry things, then they throw some haymakers until they get tired, grab each other in a schoolyard, bully headlock, tumble on the ground, and then wait for a face-saving exit when their friends pull them apart and say, get off it, stop it, guys, stop it. And then they get up and shout some more angry words and walk away glad because, they ran out of gas somewhere on step 1. Yeah. And anyway, that's not self-defense, but I think a lot of people make that mistake, that if there is a physical altercation at all, then of course it's justifiable to injure another person. So I always tell people self-defense is a legal term, and what that means is going to vary wildly depending on where you live. So you live in Australia, I live in the People's Republic of China. I've lived in a few different countries throughout the world, and self-defense laws vary radically from place to place. What are some of the most characteristic self-defense laws where you live? Like, what are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? What is common knowledge and what is not that you're aware of in Australia?
Yeah. In Australia, you are not allowed to have any kind of weapon or implement that's intentionally designed for the purpose of defending yourself. So obviously that means like none of the more kind of standout weapons like a knife or a gun or anything like that, but also no pepper spray. Even in a video where I tested all the different ways where you can use keys as self-defense weapons, one of them was to have your keys on a lanyard, right? So what you need to do if you did intend to use that, you couldn't tell people that I carry this in case I need to swing it, because that in itself tells them that you have the intent to use it as a weapon. So you need to come up with some kind of other excuse there. So to answer your question, what can you do? Really nothing. What can't you do? Pretty much everything. You can't have any implement designed for self-defense whatsoever in Australia.
Interesting. Yeah, is it legal to own that stuff? at all, or just not carry it and use it?
You can definitely own like decorative katanas and stuff like that, but it has to stay in your house. Like I've won a couple of like I have some machetes I've won from winning competitions, and they're in my house, and that's fine. But I can't ever take them out of the house. Or if someone were to break in, if I use that as self-defense, I would have a very difficult time explaining using a machete in self-defense. I train with some people who used to train at the gym that I go to have been like lawyers and police officers and stuff like that, so they're very familiar with the law, and they always say it goes by a case-by-case basis, but the main thing you need to be able to do is state why you defended yourself in a way that does not tell the judge or the jury that you explicitly decided to pick up whatever implement you picked up in order to defend yourself. So if you went to the kitchen to get a knife with the intent of using it, that's going to work against you very heavily. As counterproductive as that sounds, that's definitely something that will bring down your points in likelihood of not going to jail.
Yeah, man, that's interesting. That's similar to how it is in China, for example. Like most people know, you can't carry or own a firearm or buy a firearm in China, except for in very rare instances with express permission from the government. But you can get a lot of weapons here. Like I've got a pretty cool weapon collection: swords and knives and spears and martial arts weapons and brass knuckles and all this stuff. But if I took that stuff outside, if I used that in an actual self-defense situation, I would be in some serious legal trouble.
Even if someone broke into your home.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how that works. Like there was an extreme case in China because they have a law which reads something like this: you are allowed to use violent action to defend yourself as long as a crime is currently in progress. But if the crime is no longer currently in progress, you are no longer justified to use violent action. So this extreme case, there was this woman, and she had her purse snatched by some guys. The guys jumped on their scooter, started to drive away. She jumped in her car, drove after them, ran them down with her car, killing one of them, injuring the other. And she was excused in the court of law. She was not found guilty of manslaughter because the crime was currently in progress.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's an extreme example, and I don't think that case would have ended the same way for everybody. Doubtless, but
I really thought that was going to go in a different direction there. I thought you were going to say she got like 20 to life or something.
Yeah, you'd think so. Like in a lot of places in the world, if a lot of other people were in her shoes, yeah, that would have ended catastrophically for her. But in that particular case, no. So again, it is imperative. If you're interested in learning self-defense, learn the law first.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I got to ask you. So you've done a bunch of these self-defense exposés, if you will, and a lot of times it's just some really goofy guys who don't know what they're doing, and then occasionally,
yes.
Occasionally, you have guys like, say, Shane Faison, the Fight Tips guy. You look at one of his older videos where he's crescent kicking a knife out of the guy's hand, and I thought that was an awesome video. But I noticed, I didn't read all of the comments, but some of them were like, "Come on, man, it's Shane, the Fight Tips guy. We love this dude. You can't speak ill of him." But it was a crappy technique then, and it's still a crappy technique now. And yeah, he's actually spoken about that on a few different social media platforms.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if you knew that, but he brought it up and he's like, "Yeah, I know that was a long time ago. I realize that's a crappy technique now. I've changed and so on." But and that's good. That's one of these things that testing out techniques does. It prevents stagnation in martial arts, and it helps keep us honest. And it doesn't matter how famous you are or how well known you are. You can totally teach garbage or just teach principles that aren't correct. Like, man, just recently I was looking over one of my old videos. Which one was it? I think it was one of my old Darce choke setup videos, and I'm looking at this thing like, through the lens of future experience, like, man, I'm getting this bit wrong and that bit, and a stronger guy would be able to get out if I did it that way, and I've learned to fix that. I should take this one down and make a better one. So, I mean, this stuff happens all the time. I think it's important. What kind of feedback did you get about that video with Shane Faison?
With Shane Faison, to be honest, I didn't get a whole lot of negative feedback on the Shane Faison one. I definitely got a lot of comments that were like, "No, we like Shane," but nothing really saying that what he taught was good, right? And I'd like to clarify. I think Shane's a great guy, and I think also he was a lot younger back then, right? And he was kind of just starting his YouTube career, and I think he was kind of focusing more on the kind of cool cinematic aspects of making videos back then, and it's a thing that looks really cool, that technique. And I think it's definitely safe to say that now, with his much more mature mindset, he wouldn't put anything like that out there, and he's a great guy. That being said, I didn't get a whole lot of bad feedback on that video, except for people just saying, no, we like Shane. I did get one of Shane's friends, I think, commented on my video on Facebook, and he told me that he was going to send it to Shane, so I don't know what ended up happening with that, but I'm glad that you said that he said Chinese whispers, not because you're from China, just because of the saying, that, he agrees that it's not the best thing to teach. The one that I did get terrible feedback on, of course, was the Gracie Jiu Jitsu knife defense one. That's the one where I got torn to shreds.
Wow.
I saw, I looked on Facebook, and I saw in some forum someone posted it. I think it was the Aperture Fight forum or something. Eli Knight tore me to shreds, and there were a lot of real criticisms of that video. And one thing that I thought it was great,
by the way.
Thank you.
Although, I thought it was great, man.
I appreciate it. Although I must admit, I think that a lot of the criticisms of my techniques that I do use in order to scientifically test these tactics are valid. I think a lot of the criticisms that people have of my videos are valid criticisms, and I was planning on releasing a video sometime soon addressing these criticisms. The main critique I get is well, I mean, by your logic, if you walked into a BJJ gym and tried to learn an armbar in 10 minutes and then you couldn't pull it off, that doesn't mean armbars are nonsense. And I think that's a great point. So I can talk to that now if you want, or we can kind of go down a different path, I suppose. I'll let you drive that.
Oh, man. I'm thinking about three different things right now. One, just going back to that taking the knife out of the hand thing that Shane was doing.
Yeah.
What's funny about that, now that I think about it, is that was actually taught in the first Taekwondo class I took.
Oh, no way.
And also the second Taekwondo class I took under a different instructor. So I'm starting to wonder if that was just a common thing to teach in Taekwondo back then, because I know Shane has a Taekwondo background as well. So, I don't know. It's something that I remember seeing a number of times in movies. And so people, I guess, just sort of accepted it and believed it. Kind of like, the Hollywood Ninja neck snap, where you walk up to someone and do that, and everybody just instantly dies, even though neck cranks don't work that way.
You did a good video on someone who taught that technique. I think it was a woman in an army singlet or something. She would just
you just casually break the neck and walk away. Yeah, I know. It's and it goes out there and people don't question it because they've been trained in the trope. It's kind of like pro wrestling, if you will. We understand pro wrestling it's scripted. It's not actual fighting. They're real stunts, real athletic performances, but they're scripted performances. But at the same time, Ken Shamrock, he wrote this book, Into the Lion's Den, I think it was, where he compared pro wrestling in Japan, because he did pro wrestling in Japan, to mixed martial arts. And he said, essentially, the reason you don't see these legitimate submissions as much in pro wrestling is because the audience is not trained to accept them as real. That's why we have these big, crazy, over-the-top moves in pro wrestling. Because the audience is gradually trained to accept them as being dangerous. So they see the diamond cutter from Dallas, Diamond Page or whatever, he holds up his hands and they're like, oh, he's going to do the move, and then he does the thing, and the audience goes wild because they're trained to accept it as legitimate. And I think this happens a lot with certain names, like Gracie, for example. We are trained through
Yeah.
through constant repetition. Royce Gracie won the UFC. It's called Gracie Jiu Jitsu, right? And so anybody with the last name Gracie, we cannot question them ever and ever. Amen, right?
Yeah.
So when you made that video about the flaws in the logic of the knife defense that Henner and Hiron, or however you say their names, put out, I could appreciate that. As a longtime jiu-jitsu practitioner, I could appreciate that, because I don't hold people up as demigods.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not what I do. And they do a lot of wonderful things, and sometimes they do things that are very, very human, and that was one of them, I thought. So, man, props to you for again not putting people up on ivory towers and bowing down and saying, I will never ever question anything. I mean, that's what martial arts is about. I mean, that in my opinion is what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu itself was founded upon, the idea of let's put this to the test. Let's get in a cage with some real martial artists and have some real fights and see what really happens. And so to say, anyone with this name of Gracie is beyond reproach and beyond questioning, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I think that kind of comes back to at the start of this, when we were talking about why do these ridiculous techniques get taught or put into circulation. My sensei told me, I told my students, they told their students. It's the same kind of thing, I suppose. If the Gracies say it, it must be good. So therefore, let's try it out and then teach it to other people. And I just hate that cycle of just dogmatic thought. So, yeah.
Yeah, man. And also I thought your video criticizing Henry Gracie was much, much, much more diplomatic than my video where I criticized him for something completely different. I don't know if you saw my parody of his Cougar self-defense thing.
Oh, no. I must have missed that one.
Oh, man, it's one of my all-time favorite videos. We had... Okay. So, did you hear that story? There was a guy hiking... and there was a mountain lion, and it jumped out and attacked him. It's a small mountain lion, and so he managed to fight it off and choke it to death. And,
what? He choked
he ended up choking. Yes.
Far out.
Basically, well, that's the story that Henry Gracie told in his video. He made it sound like he's using like guard passes and technical arm drags and stuff, and putting it in a rear naked choke.
Set up a triangle choke or something.
Yeah, and the reality was it was a baby cougar, and he stepped on its neck, and yeah, that was about it. Very anticlimactic when you hear the real story. But he got mauled pretty bad, because even a baby mountain lion is a very dangerous animal.
Yeah.
If it wants to attack you. Anyone
who has cats can back that up.
Yeah, man. Yeah, cats. What is up with cats? It's like having a miniature apex predator in your home. I mean, think about the logic behind that. It would be like having a miniature Tyrannosaurus Rex crawling around going like, and then we'd all say, oh, it's so cute because it's little. And inside that T-Rex is thinking, I would devour you whole if you just weren't so big.
Yeah.
But that's what cats are, man.
Yeah, they're...
if you weren't so big, they'd eat you.
Oh, yeah. I think I saw an article on that once, like, studying cat psychology, and they have shown genuine intent to, like, murder their owners at some point. Don't quote me on that in relation to science, but I saw an article somewhere once, so, yeah, be cautious.
Oh, man. I've got some scars on my face hidden by my facial hair from cats. Totally unprovoked attacks.
Yeah.
Man. Self-defense against cats, man. Somebody needs to make that video. That's
coming up next week.
That's a real problem in the world today.
Putting it in the schedule.
All right, so where were we going? We were talking about Henry Gracie and his knife video, and you got some criticism, and Eli Knight said some things, and you were about to say something, and I cut you off with a segue about the Taekwondo crescent kicks.
Oh yeah, so I was essentially going to talk about how I think people do make a lot of criticisms about my scientific techniques, and I think that a lot of those criticisms are valid criticisms. Because when you think about it, the logic I apply in my videos is, here's a technique, I think it's not going to work, so I'm going to try it and practice it for like 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll put it against real resistance and see if it works. And if we're going to use logic to come to a particular conclusion, I think it's important that we're consistent with that logic. So if I were to be consistent with that logic, I would then have to go to like a jiu-jitsu gym and then apply that same logic to an armbar or a triangle choke. And of course, that would be ridiculous because arm bars and triangle chokes do work. It's proven. So I guess the one thing that I just want to make very clear is my thought process around the whole thing isn't, hey, here's a technique, let me test it and see if it works. My thought process is, I've trained for X amount of years. I've been in a decent amount of fights. I know what works. I know what the laws of a fight are. So I watch a YouTube video and I'm like, in order for this to work, it would have to disobey all laws of logic and physics. And then I just think of what's a creative way I can try to like show that this is nonsense. And in some cases I can show that easily, right? Like with the kicking the knife out of the hand, I can do that well because I can literally get someone to stand there while I like try to kick it out. But with other ones, it's a little bit more difficult. And those tend to be the videos I get most of the criticism on. And that would be an example of that would be the Gracie video, because it's like, well, these Gracies have been training this expert knife defense technique for years. Whereas my thought process is like, no matter how long you've trained this for, it's just not a thing that you'll get to work. And I actually have a video, which kind of goes against what I just said, where I get that exact same technique to work. I went out on the street and I asked people to try to stab me for 1 minute while I tried to defend against it. It's only on Facebook. It's not on YouTube. I filmed it a while ago. And I pulled that move off in that situation. But I think the important distinction between someone actually trying to kill you and the situation in which I pulled that off was, in the situation where I pulled it off, the guy was very hesitant and he didn't want to stab me. You know, he was just kind of like, ooh, I don't know about this. I don't know about it. So
yeah,
if you compare,
it's funny how often that happens, even with like a rubber knife, where they know it won't hurt anybody.
Yeah, it was literally a
sharp. Get in the mindset, I can't do it.
Yeah. So if you compare that kind of energy to like when I came back to YouTube for the third time, most recently, I put up the full contact knife self-defense analysis stuff. So if you compare the kind of energy the guy gave me when I pulled off that move to the kind of energy you see in that video where people are actually trying to stab me, you can just tell that there's no way you could pull off such a move. Because in order for it to work, people would have to stab and then leave their arm there for a couple of seconds before they retract. But people don't do that. It's a sewing machine. So that was just one thing I wanted to clarify, that I agree that some of the criticisms in relation to my like scientific methods are valid, but I don't see that as an actual issue when you consider the fact that I'm not some guy who's never done combat sports before. So
yeah, I got a lot of criticisms about the ones I've made as well, but generally it's just like, you're just playing dumb, man. You know this move works. I'm like, well, actually, a great example of what I'm trying to say is, what was the lady's name? I think you made a video about her as well. Anyway,
not split-second survival.
Not split-second survival, man. I wish those guys would make their Facebook page public again, because it was a gold mine. It was an absolute gold mine for guys like us, man. It was beautiful. It was amazing. Please come back if you're watching.
Like we hate you. Come back.
Oh, man, I love those guys. I love them. Okay, for anybody watching, if you don't know who split-second survival is, quick synopsis. It is this group of self-defense enthusiasts, I put that in quotes, up in Alaska. And they dream up the most crazy, insane self-defense situations where it's like straight out of a John Wick movie. Like, you have three guys pointing guns in your head. One of them is pointing a knife at your guts. You're standing over a pit of sharks. You're on fire. You have 2 seconds. Go! What do you do? And, like, it sounds like an exaggeration, but really so much of their stuff it's out there. It's crazy out there stuff. It's fun. Maybe it's just a group of lunatics having fun. I don't know. But it was my favorite thing on the internet for the longest time. So, but yeah, this was a different lady. And this middle-aged, kind of overweight lady, and she's teaching some really badly performed, like Japanese-style jiu-jitsu, like Aikido-style moves. And I know what moves she's trying to do. Like, I know how to do them correctly. I know how to set them up and so on. I know the pros and the cons, how they work and how they don't work. And she's teaching everything wrong. And the way she's teaching it you would need a tremendous level of strength far beyond your attacker in order to make them work. And so I tried to stress that point through comedy in my videos, and everyone's like, you just don't understand the technique, even though during the second half of the video I show, like, this is how you actually do these techniques. Yeah. But again, people have a short attention span. They usually just watch like half the video and then tune out after that, unfortunately. So that's taught me a lot about how to restructure these videos for future reference. Like, maybe point out, I actually know what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm not just playing dumb. Now let's play dumb and see what happens. But a lot of self-defense videos, I think, fall into the category of untestable. And one of those, Master Wong is a great example. Like, he makes a lot of untestable self-defense videos. For example, somebody attacks you on the streets. So what do? You rip off his genitals and stick them in his mouth.
Yeah.
Do some other crazy thing, and it's like, in theory that would work, but how do we test it? Like, this is something you can't even train in the gym. So what do you do with that? Like, you can't really make a video about that. Let's test it out, because no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So when Master Wong made a video on how to do the rear naked choke, and he did a less than perfect version of the rear naked choke, man, I jumped all over that.
I remember it well.
But oh, the internet remembers it well, man. They're still crying for blood. Fight, let them fight. I gotta ask you, has anybody ever challenged you to a fight because of your work on YouTube?
No. The closest I get is people on the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu video. They're like, they have a challenge to everyone. If you want to come in and challenge us, come in and do it. So they were telling me to like fly to the Gracie's gym in the US and give it a go. But no one I've actually made fun of has asked me that to fight them. No.
Oh man, I gotta love that. The internet. Yeah, go spend like $3,000 of your own money to get a plane ticket, and take 3 days off work so you can fly over here and let us kick your butt over at our own gym under our own home court advantage. And nobody ever does that, man.
I'll tell you what. If you give me 1 million subscribers and passive income for the rest of my life, I will do that. But until I can afford to like upend my life, I'm probably not going to pay for a $3,000 plane ticket.
Oh man, that would be amazing, though. That would be an amazing YouTube channel. I would love to see that. Like, a guy who actually takes people up on those gym challenges. Like, yeah, fly out to my gym over here 10,000 miles away, and spar with me and see what really happens, and then you actually do it. And that would be the best YouTube channel ever, man.
Well, that's pretty
Who
much
actually has the.
That's pretty much what is it? Xu Xiaodong? Is that? I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but that's pretty much him.
Yeah,
right?
Xu Xiaodong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that was his intent. Then, of course, you also run into some problems there, like Xu Xiaodong, and his big problem, I think, is the fact that what he did runs so contrary to Chinese culture, specifically the Chinese culture of saving face. If you're not familiar with Chinese culture, if you haven't lived in the People's Republic of China, this is a very foreign concept to Westerners. But the idea of your reputation, your face, and keeping up your image, keeping up appearances is super important. And so if you publicly embarrass somebody, oh man, that is one of the biggest faux pas in China, to publicly embarrass somebody. And so when Xu Xiaodong beat up the Tai Chi guy, he could have gone about that differently, and it may not have expressed his point as well. But, and I'm probably going to be called a commie lover pinko or whatever for saying this, but I get this constantly on my channel. You live in China, you must love the Chinese government. But this is not a political statement. This is just about how Chinese culture works. So he goes out there, he beats up a guy claiming Tai Chi. He's a master of Tai Chi. He's not, but he's claiming that. And after the fight, Xu Xiaodong makes a very public statement about how essentially these traditional Chinese martial arts suck, and essentially spits on spits on not just this guy he just beat up, but Chinese tradition and Chinese culture, and the Chinese people are not having it. They're like, we don't like that. That's not how our culture works. And a lot of people are understandably, from the Chinese perspective, unhappy about that. Now, in the West, this resonates very, very differently. And so we see some goofy bullshito guys getting beat up, and we're like, yeah, let's see more of this. Come on, man. Blood. So we're seeing this radical clash of cultures here through what he's doing, and so he's largely been embraced by Western media, Western culture, and eschewed by his own culture. So anyway, that's my rambling about Xu Xiaodong.
Yeah, interesting. I guess I've only seen it from the Western perspective, which is just like, yeah, show him who's boss.
You know what he could have done if he wanted to be beloved in China, if he wanted to be like a Chinese superhero, basically, what he could have done is essentially said, my kung fu is real and his is not, and therefore I shall challenge him and defeat him to prove that this is legitimate kung fu and he is a fake. And then he could have beaten up this guy and embarrassed the one guy, but then saved face with Chinese culture, and everybody would have been like, Xu Xiaodong's the greatest guy ever and his kung fu is awesome. You know, but that's not what he was all about. And so you have to respect that aspect of him, that he understood the culture, he knew exactly what he was doing going into that. He may not have understood the long-term ramifications of it, but he did understand the cultural ramifications of what he was doing. So you have to appreciate at least his honesty about that. So speaking of honesty, man, that's one thing I love about your channel, is that it's so brutally honest. Like you show everything, warts and all. If it works, you show it. If it doesn't work, you show it. And it's not just these goofy self-defense videos you make. I mean, tell us a little bit more about the other videos that you put up.
What other videos do I put up? That's a good question. At the moment, I'm having a mind blank. The other videos I put up, the most recent one was just like a breakdown of some sparring footage. And other than that, I put up recently just an instructional on like how to use your environment as a weapon. Is that kind of what you're referring to, or?
Yeah, I've seen you put up a bunch of sparring videos, but they're not typical gym sparring videos where you have the two guys put on gloves and touch gloves and then go. They are these radically different scenarios, and you've got like different terrains and obstacles and stuff emulating what may actually happen in the streets, if you will. Yeah,
absolutely. So
why do you spar like that as opposed to the traditional gym sparring method?
Yeah, so we first thing I should point out is we definitely do both, because I think it's important to do both of those things. You should definitely have a foundation of like basic mixed martial arts skills before you start trying to implement the other stuff. But the main thing I'm grateful for is the gym I go to, which is Western Combatives in Penrith, Australia. They have a whole room dedicated to just scenario and situational combat training. So you've got like a big, long green thing that can be a couch or a bench or a bar, and you've got all of these different things that can replicate like bins and seats and tables and everything. So you can change the room around into any environment you want and essentially start fighting in there. And the primary reason is for a couple of reasons. One of the main gaps that you have between traditional kind of just touch gloves in a big open space and go and an enclosed space is the effect that the environment has on like footwork, how you conduct yourself in the fight, angles. So like if you have a waist level bench, you can utilize that to your advantage by simply slipping a punch, pivoting off, and then just pushing them in the direction and bending them over that bench. And then you have exhibited very little effort for a huge reward, because now that's so hard to get out of that position when you're like bent back over a bench. And then when it's a couch, for example, or like a chair that squishes in, or a mattress, like if you can bend someone over that at waist level, you don't really need to do a lot from there. You can just hold people down there. So the main reason, to answer your question, is just to close the gap between what happens in the mixed martial arts realm and what happens in reality as much as possible. And the other kind of element we add into that is, of course, the verbal element. So getting people used to that being verbally abused prior to being physically abused, and more specifically, getting people used to understanding when the verbal is going to become the physical. Because I think that's one of the things that shocked me the most when I came out of my like traditional martial arts background, because we would always start just touch gloves, do very traditional kind of point sparring. And I'm sure there's a time and a place for that, right? And it can definitely be beneficial. But if that's all you do, you're going to be ill prepared. So I went from doing that, and then all of a sudden I had this guy in my face, like frothing at the mouth and screaming at me and calling me names and yelling as hard as he could, and his face is getting red. And my body just kind of shut down. So to get people used to the verbal side so that their body doesn't shut down and they can then access the actual skill set they have is as important as having that skill set in the first place. Because it's like having the skill set behind a door. But if you're not used to the verbal assault, that door is locked and you can't get into your garage to get the chainsaw out. It's like, cool, you have a chainsaw, but if you can't get to the shed to get the chainsaw out, you don't have a chainsaw, you know? So it's important to cover the verbal aspects as well as the physical aspects, and just account for as many differences as you possibly can. Like if you look at a lot of on the streets CCTV footage of fights, there's a lot of things that go wrong just because of a slight environmental hazard. There was a CCTV footage of a fight at a pub in Australia. This guy just runs a guy over like a pokies machine. Do you guys call them pokies machines? Like the gambling machines where you like pull the stick and it has the slots.
Oh, like a slot machine, yeah.
A slot machine, yeah. In Australia they call
pokey machine. Interesting.
I don't know why. I've always hated the things, but this guy just runs him over a pokies machine, and that's like a fight ender. And he had to do really not a whole lot, just move the guy backwards towards it. So, yeah, I guess that's an elaborate answer to the question.
As soon as you change just one minor variable of a fight, it changes the fight 100%. 100%. Like in combat sports, for example, if you change one simple rule, for example, if you compare K1 rules kickboxing with Muay Thai, right?
Yeah.
Well, we changed actually a bunch of rules right there. They're similar sports, but they're also radically different. If you've only trained in K1 and then you compete in Muay Thai, you're going to get killed inside the clinch. You're going to get cut up with elbows and just demolished in all kinds of ways you haven't trained for. If you train in Muay Thai exclusively and then compete under K1 rules, you're probably going to lose on points every time because the pacing and the rule set and so on is just different enough that it makes that substantial of a difference. Now, again, when you introduce all these other variables, you are attacked by surprise. Somebody demoralizes you verbally first. You're in a state of shock. It's a whole different ballgame. I mean, people took note, for example, when Conor McGregor made himself famous by verbally demoralizing his opponents in the pre-fight interviews and the stare downs and the weigh-ins and all of this, and this kind of shocked people. They were like, UFC fighters don't normally do this. What's happening? And it's arguable that this led to a number of his victories. For example, against Jose Aldo, where he got up in his face and got to him psychologically. And Jose Aldo in that fight, in the first 30 seconds of that fight, just made some very amateur mistakes that he has never made before in his whole entire career. And Conor was able to capitalize on that. And that's just a microcosm, if you will. Just a one tiny little change in the sport psychology changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think how that can translate over to self-defense, how you were talking about someone like mentally getting in your head, which changes how you act physically. I think that can also, this is another video I put up recently about like why mixed martial arts is not enough for self-defense. And in this video, I go over, even if you're really, really good at mixed martial arts, it still doesn't cover the pre-confrontation cues. And someone who's really good at physically fighting can often just make such amateur mistakes in the confrontation phase. And a lot of the time they make these mistakes because they are so good at fighting physically. So it's almost like there's an inverse relationship between your skill physically and your skill in the confrontation phase if you don't train the confrontation phase. And what I mean by this is an example that I put in this video was this fighter basically doing the face-off thing, when they do the stare downs at like weigh-ins, doing that in a self-defense situation is the equivalent of trying to, like, you know, throwing a jab and then your hand drops down to your hips and you leave it at your hip for 2 seconds and then you bring it up to your face. Like, if you see someone do it, you're just like, all right, bro, like, you got to work on that. You know, you clearly haven't trained that anywhere near enough and you're ill prepared, because there's so many variables there. Like, you can't react to someone pulling out a knife and stabbing you from that distance with your hands down by your hips. So yeah, it's important to consider the differences between the verbal phase and the physical phase and know how to close that gap as much as possible.
Yeah, so we're talking about like phases of self-defense conflicts, a verbal phase, a physical phase. How many phases would you put in this equation?
Right. Generally, I think of the 3 phases. You've got the pre-fight verbal confrontation phase, and then you've got the actual physical altercation, and then you also have the after the fact. And after the fact, I usually think of as like the legal phase, like dealing with the police and, you know, trying to articulate yourself as effectively as possible. Because I think a big part of self-defense is trying not to go to jail, because it's like, if you win a fight with one dude and then you end up not being able to clearly articulate yourself, and you then end up in jail and you get in 200 more fights with other dudes in jail, you were probably better off just losing that initial fight, to be honest. Like, so I would say there's the three phases in my mind.
I think everybody has this fantasy idea about how a fight is going to work, and they think, well, if this happened, I would just do that. I would just do the other. And again, this is echoed in these bad self-defense videos. Like, one comment that came up again and again, like almost every time I've criticized somebody's defense of the two-handed rape choke, somebody puts 2 hands on your throat and starts squeezing. And then they teach some nonsense defense against that. Hundreds of people in the comments say, well, I would just chop my hands down on the elbows, and then that
Obviously.
And if you've ever tried that, I know you've tried that, I've tried that, it doesn't work. You can hit them as hard as you can be the bigger, stronger guy fighting a child, and that's not going to work. Mm-hmm. It's just biomechanically stupid. But everybody thinks this. They imagine in their minds, like, this is what would work. I would do that, and then it would break his grip or something, and I would solve the problem magically. Where does this type of magical thinking come from?
Yeah, I think again, it just comes to that kind of that initial discussion we were having at the beginning of the video, where it's just someone sees something and they feel a need to be able to conquer it due to some fear that they have, and then they find someone who has an answer. And this person who's seeking the answer doesn't have the capacity to distinguish a good answer from a bad answer. And I kind of encounter this kind of thinking a lot when I tell people my self-defense story, how I first started traditional karate. And if that person, like, themselves does karate, they'll often say to me, like, oh, no, my karate gym is good. But the first thought I have is, like, what makes you think that you have the capacity to tell the difference between a good gym and a bad gym? And I think a lot of the people that go for these kind of nonsense choke defenses just don't have the capacity to tell the difference. And the person who's teaching it, whether or not they have the capacity to tell the difference, isn't willing to be honest about pressure testing it and actually seeing if it works. So a combination of dishonesty with being just vulnerable to being conned, I suppose.
Everybody thinks their gym is the right one, man. Everybody thinks their gym is a good one. Yeah. I made a video years ago about Krav Maga titled, What Do I Think About Krav Maga? And I've met a lot of bad Krav Maga instructors. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to put that out there. There are a lot of bad Krav Maga instructors.
Absolutely.
And I've met a couple of good ones, but mostly bad ones.
Yeah.
And I said something to that effect in this video, and I got maybe 1,000 comments that said, well, my Krav Maga gym is one of the good ones. Mm. And I was thinking, what's the likelihood of that? If like 95% of the Krav Maga instructors I've met are just terrible, what is the likelihood that all 1,000 of these guys go to one of the good ones, if you will?
Yeah, they all go to the same gym.
I mean, maybe that's it. It's a gym with 1,000 people in it. That's a big gym, man. That's a big gym. But yeah, I think it's part of the sunk cost fallacy. The idea that if you've invested time and resources and attention into something, then you have a vested interest in proving that that's true or that that's viable. And I remember feeling that with Taekwondo for a very long time, wanting to prove that Taekwondo was good for things other than Taekwondo competitions. Mm. And so when I started professional kickboxing, like my goal wasn't to win professional kickboxing matches, it was to show off Taekwondo techniques in professional kickboxing matches, which is a stupid goal. I mean, your goal should always be to win if you're fighting. But when I started out, that wasn't it. And I wasn't really honest with myself about what I was doing. And because of that, I suffered for it. Mm. And it held me back quite a bit. But it was that sunk cost fallacy. I've spent all of this time, I've spent over a decade doing Olympic-style Taekwondo, and I want to prove that it's good for something else besides just that one very specific thing. And there are beautiful techniques in Taekwondo, which I still use and teach to this day, the 7 basic fundamental kicks, and even some of the fancy ones, which I love and use. But as it's taught, as it stands, as it is, it's a radically different thing. And when we try to make a square peg fit in a round hole, it just simply doesn't work.
Absolutely. But I think that's a really good analogy, like putting a square peg in a round hole. Because when I think of self-defense, I naturally think of all of the times I've actually had to defend myself. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mick Coop, but I very much agree with kind of his 3 fundamental rules of what you don't have enough of when it comes time to defend yourself. You generally don't have enough time, but specifically in relation to like Taekwondo, you just don't have enough space a lot of the time. Like whenever I've had to defend myself, it's always been, for the most part, on public transport, taking a train, taking a bus, because I've had to do that quite a lot throughout my life. And thinking about trying to do like a spinning back kick or even any kind of head kick in that scenario where the train's moving and you've got like seats, it's just unfathomable. So if that's all you have, then all I can say is good luck. And I'm not saying that there's not going to be anecdotal examples of it working. I'm sure there are situations in which it's perfectly applicable to defend yourself. But I'd say if I had to bet on choosing one, Taekwondo probably wouldn't be it.
Yeah, it's going to be a high-risk, low-reward strategy for a very high-risk situation with dire consequences. Mm. And when I say things like this, something I am often rebuted with in comment sections of YouTube videos is, but Ramsey, in my Taekwondo class, we also train close-range combat, and we train with elbows and clinching, and we do some groundwork. And I'm like, I've seen a lot of gyms that purport to do these things. Like, we also train this and that, but they don't spar. They don't spar those things. Some of them do. Most of them don't. And those that do often don't do it to the level that they think they do. Absolutely.
I went to a Jiu Jitsu gym, and if you look at their curriculum, technically they train mixed martial arts. But they train Jiu Jitsu 7 days a week, and then on one of these days they have an MMA class. But the MMA class is literally just doing light pads. So it's like, you can say, I train MMA as well, I train striking, but it's like, you don't really train it to the extent that you need to be able to use it.
I know, man. Like, if you look at the Taekwondo forms, the movements in those forms include grappling. Like all those weird hand movements, those are grappling movements. And so you can technically say, well, my Taekwondo includes grappling techniques. Well, sure, it technically includes grappling techniques in the syllabus that you never, ever use or practice.
Yeah.
So, and then I also get people like Hapkido practitioners, especially, they come at me all the time saying, well, in Hapkido, we also practice weapons. I'm like, no, you don't. You have never taken a kama, one of those Japanese sickles, and you've never put a blade into human flesh before. You've never defended yourself with one of those things.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing saying, I practice weapon forms. Okay. And another thing saying, I practice fighting with weapons. No, you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few people on this planet that do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you can try to get as close as you possibly can to it, but a lot of the time it's not as close as you need to be, and there's always going to be a gap that you have to try to fill when it comes down to it. I think the most important thing there is just to be aware of, like, if you're doing weapons training like that and you are so confident as to say, but I train weapons, then that immediately tells me that you don't understand how big that gap is that you're going to have to close when the moment comes. And I think the biggest gift that people need who think they can defend themselves is the knowledge of how big that gap is, because a lot of the time it's a lot bigger than people think it is.
It's huge, man. It's huge. The average male tends to believe they are 9,000% more effective at fighting than they really are, as the old Onion article said.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's absolutely true. I mean, that was supposed to be a fake news site, but man, the Onion, they reported the absolute truth when they wrote that thing. How big do you suppose that gap is? Yeah, man, let's talk about weapons for a little bit. Training with weapons, and this is something you've done some of. I've seen this on your channel, like sparring with knives and stuff.
Yep.
What do you think is the most, like, I can't really think of a way to spar with knives that really emulates reality, because if you got stabbed or slashed, that messes with your head in a big way. If you're bleeding, that's a whole different thing than not bleeding. But in your experience, there, yeah. Oh man, like I was having a conversation in the comments with Rokas from Martial Arts Journey the other day. He talked about his last MMA fight, and I talked about my last MMA fight. And both of these fights, we were puking up blood afterward because we had some fractures in the sinuses that were bleeding into the stomach. And you get enough blood in your stomach, you'll throw it up, and it's very disconcerting when you're throwing up your own blood. It's like, I see this in the movies right before people die. What's happening?
Yeah.
But yeah, in your experience, what do you think is the most effective, efficient way to train for knife fighting or knife self-defense?
Yeah. I'm torn between going in two directions with this. I think, first, I'll answer your question directly. I think the most effective way of training it is, first of all, get someone to actually try to put it inside of you as hard as they possibly can, so you can eliminate any kind of illusion. But secondly, the more that we train knife defense realistically at my gym, the more we kind of come to the conclusion of just, like, beyond applying particular concepts, a concept, for example, being like, put something between you and the knife, pick something up and put something in between you. But the more we train it, the more we kind of come to the conclusion that once it's out and this person wants to stab you, like, it's just so incredibly difficult. And we kind of start to think we really should be putting the vast majority of our focus on trying to not deal with the knife once it's out, but trying to understand and detect pre-contact cues and watch the hands while this person is kind of mouthing off to us, to detect when they're about to deploy it and prevent that happening in the first place. Because up until that point, the point where the knife is out, there really is quite a lot you can do. It's not that hard to go in for a body lock and tie their arm up when you see someone reach into their pocket. But it's tremendously, almost impossible to try to trap it once it's out flailing around. And in the process of trying to do that, you're probably going to get your arms cut up. I did a video recently called Backpack versus Knife, and does it work? And in the empty-handed knife round, I was kind of blocking a lot of the shots, but I got a lot of comments saying, like, in reality, wouldn't you have got cut up? And it's like, yeah, I would. And there's nothing I can do to close that gap. Like, other than put a real knife in his hand, I just have to be comfortable with getting as close to closing that gap as I can, because there's nothing I can do. And I think the most important thing there for me is to be able to understand that the gap between my training and the reality is enormous. And the biggest thing we need to try to do is make sure we close that gap as much as we can. And if we can't close it anymore, just understand how big it is. And in the case of knife defense, I think it's just crucially important that we understand that it's huge, because I don't have a a specific answer for you, because I don't know that there's anything we can do to close that gap any more than anyone has. You can train with shock knives. I've never done that because, of course, it's illegal in Australia. But even then, there's no real fear of death. You know, when you see an actual knife, it's you can't mimic what you feel there. I've been in two situations with an actual knife. This is all before I've done my reality-based self-defense training. One of them was after. The first one was at a party, and someone put a guy's hat in a microwave, and he was angry, so he took a knife out and just started swailing it around randomly. And my reaction was just to go in for a double leg takedown, and I did it. And thankfully, I didn't get stabbed in the back because he was just drunk and he just kind of fell over. And then the second one was actually with a friend. He had a little kitchen knife, and but it had a sheath on it, and we were both drunk. I don't drink in public anymore, largely because of this kind of reasoning. But he ended up like trying to stab me with it, and I was like, all right, yeah, we'll go along with it, see if my stuff works. But then halfway through, the sheath came off, and it was an actual knife coming at me now, and my pinky got sliced up like halfway. I had to go get stitches and stuff. But I just remember in both of those occasions, what I felt comes nothing close to what I feel in training, and I can't replicate that fear because it's just enormous. So I don't know what we can do to close the gap any further than just what I'm doing at the moment. So I guess that's my answer.
It's basically an impossible question because, you know, it's an impossible task. One thing you said made me think of statistics. Like, if you look at statistics of knife attacks, people killed with knives, how many times are they usually stabbed? It's like he was stabbed 50 times by the attacker. He was stabbed 100 times by the attacker. And that sounds kind of funny. Like in the movies, we see a guy get stabbed once and then he's like, and he falls down dead instantly.
Yeah.
But in real life, we have these people who are just absolutely enraged to the point that they are stabbing somebody repeatedly. And I think there are several reasons for this. One, you know, the pre-violence escalation brought it up to that point where they were so enraged, but also the fact that, unlike the movies, you stab them once and they're not dead.
Yes.
And there's something crazy like a 60% survival rate from stab victims because knife stabs don't usually kill people right away. But if you get stabbed, people are generally in shock and they're freaking out and they're screaming and they're fighting back for their lives. And so, you know, this enraged person is just going to keep going and going like, why aren't you dead? Why aren't you dead yet? And they'll just... But that is an enormous level of rage. Like that is... It's almost incomprehensible if you're calmed down, if you're thinking rationally. But as you said before... absolutely the best time to defend yourself against a knife is before that knife comes out.
Yeah.
I mean, people always ask me, like, Ramsey, how many street fights have you been in? Which I'll say, I don't get into street fights. And they're like, what? You've never been in a street fight? I'm like, unless you count schoolyard bully scraps, no. Because as an adult man... When other adult men come up to me and have malicious intentions, I am really good at avoiding violence and not escalating that into a whole thing. And they don't like that answer. They want to hear some, I don't know, Hollywood kung fu ninja fight story. So, man, I got to ask you, as a practitioner of martial arts and self-defense techniques, how often do you get into street fights?
I try my best to make the answer never. And I think you've said a phrase a couple of times back when we were talking about the Chinese martial arts stuff, and that phrase was "save face."
Yes.
And the basic...
giving people a face-saving exit.
Yes.
Goes a very long way.
Absolutely. And I think that is some of the most valuable self-defense advice you can ever give someone. Allowing somebody to leave the situation without feeling like their ego has been damaged or without feeling like they've lost I think is one of the most valuable self-defense tactics you can ever employ. So I try to do that as much as I can, and as a result, I don't get in street fights ever. So I think that's the best tactic, just giving someone the option to save face. I have been in a couple of situations in the past. You know, the knife ones I talked about, one was just a friend, the other one was at a party. The most salient one that sticks out to me is when I was 18. I was talking about it before. These 3 cars drove past. They ended up coming back around and pulling over, and in each car was 5 buff, like steroided up gym junkies. They looked like 25, 26, and I was this 18-year-old kid. I've been training like mixed martial arts and Muay Thai and stuff. I was all right. But these guys just would not take no for an answer, and they just wanted to scrap. So I figured, look, my options are either get gang bashed by literally 15 huge guys, or hope that I can challenge one of their egos enough to fight me one-on-one and prove to their friends how tough they are. So I said to the biggest guy, look, dude, I get like you want to fight, you're not going to go away, so how about I fight you? If you win, you get all of our wallets, and if I win, you just let us go. And I got in their car, right? They let me in their car. They drove me down to this like abandoned car park, and they
took you to a second location.
They did.
Nick Zorso say?
Yeah, man, he would be so disappointed. He would be so disappointed in me. This is also another reason I don't drink when I go out anymore, because I was quite intoxicated at this point. But they parked in a car park, put all of their lights like a Fight Club scene. You know, you've got the light shining in the center, and then I basically scrapped it out with this dude. And I was quite intoxicated, so I woke up with a bruised face the next morning. All of that, 100% of the injuries were from tripping over my own feet and just face planting because I was so drunk. But they ended up letting me go. They let all of us go, and they just drove off, and they were like, good fight, dude. So it worked out in my favor. And I think a situation like that is the only one where I would think of intentionally engaging in it, because the only alternative at that point was to get gang bashed, and my 2 friends couldn't run and they couldn't fight, and there were 15 of them. So other than that, give people a safe phasing option, a safe face saving option. But yeah, I try not to get in street fights, because you know, once you pass the age of like 15, you should probably stop stepping outside to get in street fights with people, because it's just almost always an avoidable option that you don't need to engage in.
Yeah, man. That is interesting how essentially it was ritual combat that gave you and your friends the face-saving exit.
Yeah.
And I had a similar experience when I was a teenager. As a Boy Scout. I was a Boy Scout, one of the Boy Scouts of America. And you know, Boy Scouts are taught all these very high values of you know, being good, upstanding citizens, but on this particular camping trip we were not. And there was another scout troop from another town, and they didn't like us very much, and we didn't like them very much, and it kind of turned into a war between these 2 groups of scouts, and we were going at it. And I was one of the older kids in this group, and there were some big, strong guys in this rival scout group, and I was thinking, man, some of these kids are going to get hurt. I need to do something to stop this. And so I went out and got a parlay together, and I got the biggest guys from over there, and I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. The biggest guy from your group against me. And they're like, okay, yeah. And they sent out this dude who was like a high school wrestler or something. And I was like, crap, I'm going to fight him. Because, man, I'm like a teenager. I didn't really know how to fight back then. And I knew it. And I said, okay, how about instead of wrestling, we arm wrestle? And the winner gets bragging rights, basically, is what I said. And they were like, okay, that sounds fair. And that's going to squash this beef, right? And I knew I was a scrawny 90-pound weakling, and I knew I was going to lose. But they agreed to this. We got up there. I arm wrestle. I lose. And they're like, yeah, we win. You guys suck. But there was peace after that. And, you know, because they had that face-saving exit through essentially ritual combat. Yeah. Which is what arm wrestling is. And that's what combat sports are as well. Like every animal species, not every, but a lot of them, especially mammals, also lizards, engage in ritual combat for the specific reason. Yeah, they do. It's crazy when you think about it. And they're engaging in ritual combat over mating rights, over territory, so nobody has to die. Because if, say, monitor lizards killed each other, which they're totally physically capable of, instead of just wrestling, then there would be a whole lot less lizards. And nobody would be happy about that in the lizard community. So we can learn a lot about ritual combat and its effectiveness in bringing that into human society. And I think that's one of the reasons why we love combat sports so much, is because our normal civilized societies are devoid of that ritual combat to give us face-saving exits and solve the problems of life and give us an outlet for aggression and so on. And so we turn to combat sports for that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting about lizards. I had no idea they did that. I'm learning all kinds of things.
Almost every species of lizards wrestles. It's weird though. Like monitors, they do Greco-Roman style wrestling. They stand up on their hind legs and they clinch and they work for the underhooks. And some of them are really technical and they use their tails for extra leverage. And then the smaller lizards like skinks, they do more freestyle and they try to they use their mouths, but they go for the hind legs. Much like freestyle wrestlers will go for a double leg and single leg and ankle pick and things like that. And they try to flip the other lizard over on its back. And again, it's ritual combat, not intended to harm, but to show supremacy, to show I'm the alpha in this situation. You don't have to die, but I'm going to show that maybe I could do it if I wanted to. So that I get to live on this rock and you go look for your own rock, basically. So it's a really simple animal instinct. And I think one thing we would benefit from a lot is realizing that we have that same instinct as human beings. But we allow ourselves to be a little too smart, so we become a little too stupid to pay attention to the instincts and to interpret those correctly. And so I think a lot of the times that's why men, especially young men, they give into this young men's ego and they end up getting into street fights and these other altercations which are often misattributed as self-defense.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is an important distinction to make between, just physical assault and self-defense, because a lot of people think like if someone pushes you and you push them and they hit you, that's self-defense. But when you think about it, they've pushed you and then you've returned with the exact same amount of force unnecessarily, which is inherently going to escalate it. Self-defense would be they push you, you try to walk away, they physically attack you, and I think, people will often conflate the two into the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A question I'm asked a lot, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, is if somebody is looking at you and you feel like they have some angry intentions toward you, should you wait for them to attack or should you attack them first? And if you attack them first, obviously it's not self-defense, at least not in most countries. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think legal concerns is definitely one, but also I think just like having moral concerns about the situation. If I attacked every guy that like gave me a dirty look, I'd get in a lot of fights, man. And I don't attack those guys, and I haven't been in a lot of fights. So based off of that life experience, I think I'm going to have to say probably don't attack the guy. And I think like I always try as part of self-defense to give the guy a way out as many times as I can until I can determine that he is in fact a bad dude. So the distinction between like social violence and antisocial violence, social violence is essentially a good or a reasonable person who's just having a bad day, whereas antisocial violence is someone who genuinely has premeditated and bad intent. So most of the time, it's social violence. Most of the time, it's a guy sitting there. He may have just found out he got cheated on. He's angry at the world. He's just looking for an excuse. Everyone's the hero of their own story. He's just looking for an excuse to convince himself that you're the bad guy so that he can then justify, that physical assault. So my tactic in that scenario is to not give him a reason to convince himself that I'm the bad guy. So if I see him looking at me and I'm like, hey, bro, what are you looking at? In his story, I am now the bad guy. So I try to not be the bad guy, I guess. And, if he stands up and he walks towards me threateningly and then he starts pushing me around, then the story might change a little bit. But until I know I'm in direct physical danger, my tactic is don't let him convince himself that I'm the bad guy.
Yeah, man. This is reminding me of when I used to fight in the United States. They had these fights in these seedy clubs and bars. They would set up a boxing ring or a fight cage in the middle of a bar.
Yeah.
And I don't drink. I don't frequent bars. I'm just not that guy. But that's where the fights were. And the weirdest thing would happen. Like after the fighters would fight, drunk guys in the crowd would want to fight them. And I know they would just watch these two guys display a level of mastery over martial arts in the ring and show I can knock out a trained fighter. And then some, I don't know what it is about alcohol, because I don't drink personally, but I think it somehow has the power to convince otherwise sane people of the insane idea that they know how to beat up trained fighters. And so the fighters would get harassed afterward, and the fighters would be like, I'm not getting in another fight that I'm not being paid for, man. But I remember this dude came up to me, and he's harassing me, and he's trying to get me to fight him. After one of these fights, I just stepped out of the cage, and I'm like, why? Why would I do this? This is obviously not a good idea. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember by the time the show was over, I knew this guy's name, and we were on friendly terms. And he no longer wanted to fight me. He was no longer thinking of fighting. He was like, dude, let's hang out like this every week. And I was like, maybe not, but we'll leave on friendly terms and call that good. So that's totally possible. I mean, almost any situation like that, I think, can be resolved. Obviously, some cannot, some have not. But working on your charisma, working on your social skills goes a very long way as far as practical self-defense does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the first step in any social self-defense situation is to figure out whether it's social or antisocial. Is it a good guy having a bad day? Because if so, that could be you someday, So, yeah, I think that's an important step. Just deciding or figuring out whether or not this person actually intends you harm, or is there a way around it? And I think it's kind of ironic, actually, when you think about these things you're talking about, like young guys feeling like they need to fuel their masculine bravado by getting in fights. Because to me, it's like there's layers to mastering yourself, right? Or being a master at life, shall we say, for the lack of a better term. The bottom layer is like, can I physically dominate this person? But then the layer above that, which is like where I place the more mature people, is I recognize that I have a desire to physically dominate this person, but I'm not going to allow my primal desires control me, because I am in control of myself. And I think that, that's just one step up. And if you don't allow your emotions and your primal instincts to run your life, you're probably going to have a much better life. And I think like that's the kind of mastery we should be aiming at, not mastery at conquering other people, but mastery at conquering ourselves. Man, they got spiritual quick, huh?
No, that's awesome, though. That's awesome. That's, when you talk about this stuff, like probably about 60% of the videos I put up on YouTube are talking head videos where I'm answering people's questions. And then a bunch of the people in the comments afterwards are kind of blowing away, and they're like, man, I came here for like martial arts tips, and I left with life lessons. And are you a psychologist? Do you study philosophy? And I'm like, no. But, when you think very deeply about one thing, like martial arts or self-defense, and you learn everything you can about that one thing, you expand your horizons in many ways. Like, I say this many times, but when you study everything there is to know about martial arts, what do you learn about? You learn about combat sports, you learn about self-defense, you learn about history and tradition, you learn about physiology, you learn about physical fitness, you can even learn about first aid, you can learn about all of these different sciences, kinesthesiology, etc. And that can branch off indefinitely. So through learning everything there is to learn about one thing, you can learn a lot about many, many things. So essentially you become a jack of all trades and a master of one, as opposed to the commonly misquoted expression, jack of all trades, master of none. Yes, that's a misquote, but everybody gets it wrong.
Right? Was that the original quote?
Yes, jack of all trades, master of one.
I
yes.
had no idea. Look at that,
yeah,
Ramsey.
Man,
I came here for self-defense advice, and I'm learning about quotes.
Yeah, popular idioms are so often, people get them wrong all the time, like the pot meat kettle one. Have you heard that one? Do they say that in Australia?
Pot meat, like the pot
okay, like
calls the kettle
pot
black?
calling the kettle black. That one,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
There's this old poem, a very old poem, about a shiny, reflective, surfaced tea kettle, and next to it is a black pot that's all scorched with soot and stuff on it. And the pot looks at its own reflection in the shiny pot and says, "Hey, kettle over there, you're black." And the shiny kettle says, "No, you're seeing your own reflection. I'm not actually black. I'm a reflective surface. What you are saying is a criticism of yourself."
That makes so much sense.
But yeah, that's the original context of that quote, but everybody gets it wrong to assume that both parties are in the fault.
Right. No way.
Yeah.
My mind feels blown right now. I had no idea. I've been using that wrong my whole life.
Everybody gets popular idioms wrong. Everybody does, though. Like, it's the semantic drift.
Yeah.
That's how words are. That's how words and expressions in all languages are. They drift in meaning over time. So, I want to change gears a little bit. Your channel, like I said, is one of the funniest things on YouTube. Like,
thank you.
You are a hilarious dude, and you, I don't know if you work at it or if it's just who you are. Like, if I say anything funny on my YouTube channel, it's almost always by accident, because when I try, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But your channel is hilarious, and I wonder sometimes if the reason that more people don't flock to your channel because it's hilarious and it's great, is because people don't understand your humor, because humor is so subjective. Now, I know a lot of Australians here in Shanghai. Like, a ton of Australians move over to China to work here, and so I've been exposed to a lot of Australian humor and accents and so on. And a lot of Americans, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but a lot of Americans have very adverse reactions to foreign accents.
Oh, right.
So I grew up in America, but my family is British, and I grew up in a British household. And I don't really sound British. I think I sound way more American than anything that would even remotely sound like somebody from England. But as small of a difference as that accent is, I remember growing up in America, people would stare at me and say, "I can't understand a single word you're saying because of your accent." And I would be like, "I just said hello. That's all." But yeah, man, what have you got any feedback about your YouTube channel, about how to just get the word out about this hidden gem, this diamond in the rough, if you will?
Look, I did actually do a course called Jump Cut Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's basically it's a course focusing on like exactly that, how to create good content and how to get it put out there. And near the beginning of my YouTube journey, I did follow like the steps very accurately, and I think that may be one of the reasons why at the beginning, if you look at my video views, it's like 200,000, 19,000, 21,000. It's a lot of views in contrast to now, whereas now it's like I'm lucky to crack 3,000. And I'm just not doing the same steps. Now I'm making content, but I'm not really like advertising it as much as I used to. So I think the first thing I wanted to focus on was just like getting the content right, and I think I'm starting to get that. So now I'm going to start kind of doing more promotion of the content, which I haven't been doing a lot of in the last 2 months that I've been back online consistently. So that's definitely the step that's missing, I think.
Yeah, man. YouTube is weird. Like, I've had a YouTube channel for 14 years. Wow. It was really just in the last 3 years that anybody started watching it. And I never really thought about what will people want to see. It was always just like, what do I want to talk about? And I think ultimately that's what ended up resonating with people. But I was thinking about this concept the other day. I don't know if you've noticed, I've been putting up these polls on YouTube lately about who would win in a fight, like in a UFC 1 style single elimination tournament, no rules, no weight classes, etc. If you pitted like all the popular martial arts YouTubers against each other. And people have been having fun in the comment sections of those polls, fighting with each other. No, Icy Mike would win. No, Sensei Seth would win. No, he's twice his size. No, he knows how to use tactical whips or whatever. No, it's unarmed combat. But it's fun to argue about stuff like that. It's like, who would win, Batman versus Superman? But one thing I noticed almost every time is that the guy with the more popular YouTube channel wins the poll, which is very different than what actually happens in a real fight, where the better athlete is the guy who wins.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking about something, and I started looking like at the more popular YouTubers, thinking, okay, what are these guys doing differently than the less popular YouTubers who are better athletes? And it's something that I think we all know, but I didn't really find a way to express it until fairly recently, which is that they are masters of different skill sets besides just fighting and teaching fighting techniques. And one of those is understanding that most of the people watching these YouTube videos are guys who are sitting alone at home, probably in a dark room, staring at their phone, and they're bored, and they're like, man, what do I do with my life? Okay? And so there's a particular talent to speaking to that type of guy.
Yeah.
And keeping that type of guy engaged and entertained. And you could spend a very long time trying to become that type of guy. I have no interest in doing that myself. Or, man, I lost my train of thought. It was a long train, though, man. It's out there somewhere. But my point is, though, you have this great YouTube channel, and I think it's very accessible it should be very accessible for a lot more people than are seeing it right now. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, just so more eyes would end up on this channel, because you're doing some fantastic work there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Matt, do you have any projects in the works that you'd like to tell us about?
I do definitely. Well, the most recent one is I'm testing, obviously, Icy Mike's flashlight theory. Video's coming out tomorrow. We're filming that. I've already filmed it. I won't tell you the result. You're gonna have to watch the video. Alternatively, there is another project I'm doing, and I guess I'll put it out there because it won't harm anything. But I got my first YouTube check finally in the Google payments. I'm like, yes, first YouTube check. Cool. And I figured when I look at like what a lot of big YouTubers do, or who a lot of big YouTubers are, I think of like Logan Paul, right, or like Jake Paul, or like kind of all these big rich YouTubers who get really rich from YouTube. And I look at what they do with their money, and they've just got like huge mansions and like $90,000 couches. And I just sit there and I look at these guys, and I'm like, what? There's like, you could just do so much with that money. You do that. So
I know, right?
It's first check. It's not a lot of money, but what I'm gonna do is I have a friend who really wants to get good at defending himself. So I'm basically gonna pay for 3 months worth of his self-defense training and film his journey. So I'm really excited about that. We'll start filming in like 2 months' time. That's the one I'm most excited about at the moment. So it's kind of be like one of those, like, I train like a fighter for 30 days, the BuzzFeed ones, but hopefully a little bit better than the BuzzFeed ones, because I like to think I'm a bit better than BuzzFeed.
You are so much better than BuzzFeed, man.
Thank you.
BuzzFeed, man. When BuzzFeed, when a channel like that, not just them, but so many others, makes a video about self-defense or anything like that, it almost always garners 1 million views or so, and it almost always gets shared on YouTube. And this is one of the reasons I started making these, MMA fighters try women's self-defense videos. You probably remember the the Marie Claire video.
Oh yeah,
With that
I
fitness
remember it very
instructor
well.
who tried out some bad self-defense videos and some bad self-defense techniques.
Yeah.
But it had this hip poppy music behind it, and everybody was sharing this on Facebook, and somebody shared it with my wife, and my wife showed it to me, and I looked at it and I said, well, what do you think about this? And she said, I feel more empowered after having seen this. And I was like,
God.
oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Because my wife is a very intelligent person.
Yeah.
And I think she's a fairly representative sample of the female population. And if she could buy into something like that and be motivated to share that with somebody else, then anybody could. And I thought, man, I got to do something. And so, I went to the gym just on a lark thinking maybe like my 12 YouTube followers will see this. 'Cause it was just like 12 guys watching my channel back then.
That's crazy.
And maybe one or two of them will share it on Facebook, or at the very least, when somebody sends this to me on Facebook, I'll be able to send them a link to this video.
Yeah.
And say, just try this stuff out. Try it out before you teach it. Like, that's all I wanted to communicate. Try it out before you teach it. And somehow that one managed to blow up. Joe Rogan shared it on his website, and ended up blowing up Reddit and Twitter and all these other social media sites. And that was mind-blowing. That was absolutely mind-blowing. But as many people have told me after making that video, you're doing God's work, my friend. You're doing God's work.
Thank you. I remember when you I think that's when you first found me and started commenting on my videos, because I did a one on the exact same video, I believe, at the time. And yeah, when you commented, you had like 1.9 thousand subscribers, and look at you now, killing it.
I thought 1.9 thousand was a lot back in the day, man.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it's all relative. YouTube fame is weird, man. It's weird. I was talking to my kids the other day about Michael Jackson, and they were listening to some Michael Jackson music, and we went down this Michael Jackson rabbit hole about who this guy was and how famous he was back in the day, and how he was so famous he couldn't even step outside. And my kids were like, man, that's a crazy level of fame. I can't imagine not being able to just go outside and live a normal life. And, back in the 80s, fame was like that. You were like ridiculously, unbelievably famous to the point where your name on a movie poster would sell the movie, or your name on a concert venue would sell out the concert venue, or your name on a record would sell the record. But now we have YouTube famous. We have like 100,000 subscribers famous. We have, the guy who has 1,000 subscribers, but his followers are super dedicated and they're like a cult, and they love that guy to death, and they will defend, But nobody outside of these cliques has any idea who any of us are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really strange. Yeah, like my partner's always showing me new YouTube videos or YouTube accounts, and they have like 3 million subscribers, and I just think, like, I had no idea this person existed. It's absolutely insane that this person is like famous, but I have no idea who they are.
Yeah, man. I tell you what, for anybody watching this video wondering, like, how do you become a famous martial arts YouTuber? The answer is you don't, not really. Like, you don't get into martial arts to become famous. You don't get into martial arts to become rich. This is something people do because they love it. This is something people do because they have a passion for it for some reason, a drive to do it. And again, my wife, for example, she got really into skincare recently. And so she started watching all these YouTube skincare videos, and I took a look at it and was like, this guy has 40 million subscribers.
Jesus.
And he just tries out skincare products and gives reviews of them. Man, if I was in this for the money, boy, am I in the wrong industry, man. Skincare products, man. That's where it's at on YouTube, apparently. I had no idea, but apparently it's a big thing, because everybody has skin.
They do. I have skin.
Not everybody gets in fights, but everybody has skin.
That's a good point. Statistically, it's a much better bet. Yeah. Go for the skincare.
Yeah, man. Which makes me wonder, how popular are the wastewater management YouTube videos? Because that's everybody uses water, man. Everybody poops.
True. Yeah, I do that. Man, that's crazy. I remember some of my most favorite comments I get in my old school videos, I used to like kind of after I debunked the person, I'd put a little poop emoji on their head and then like run to the bathroom and
I remember that.
Yeah, I don't know why I stopped. I might take it up again. We'll see.
It was funny.
Everyone always, whenever I did those, everyone would always leave comments like, "You have a squatty potty," which is like the little stool that you have next to you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, everyone was
that's
obsessed
right.
with my squatty potty. So I don't know where I was going with that. Maybe I just wanted to brag about the squatty potty. I don't know.
It is the most ergonomically correct way to poop, by squatting.
Yeah, absolutely. It reduces your risk of bowel cancer by a lot.
Yeah, I mean it's the norm here in Asia. The Asian squat toilet, basically a hole over the ground. Sometimes they'll have a fancy one that you can flush it, but you're just squatting over it. It's weird if you're not used to that sort of thing until you try it, and then you're like, man, how did I live without squat toilets?
Yeah, I've never tried a squat toilet. I hope one day it comes my way.
Well, take a field trip over to China, man. You'll see them. They're everywhere.
Even in houses and stuff, or like in a house.
In Shanghai apartments, like where I live, almost every Shanghai apartment has a standard Western sit toilet. But public restrooms are almost always squat toilets.
Is it just a hole in the ground? Or
well, it's like there's like a porcelain fixture in there, so it's easy to clean. You know, like a urinal or something, but it's on the ground and you just squat over it, and it's got some like ridges, texture, so you don't slip on the thing where you can put your feet. But yeah, it's the norm over here.
Sounds like the
dream.
dream.
The first time I saw one of those, I was like, I know, man. It's like one of those weird dreams. You were like, where did the toilet go, man? I gotta pee, and there's no toilet. And then you wake up and you wet the bed. And true story from being 5 years old, man.
Tell me about it. I don't think I was ever a bedwetter, but I slept underneath the bedwetter sometimes, and I think that was the worst end of the deal.
Oh man. I shared bunk beds with my brothers for most of my childhood, man.
Yeah.
So, did you grow up with siblings?
No, I have. I'm an only child, but I have two half siblings. So, like, my father remarried and had children. So I've always had that not lonely child, but the only child life, because I've lived with my mom for most of my life. So I haven't grown up with them or around them. No, thankfully, I've had my own room and my own bed, and I've been very, very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I was asking because, man, kids fight. Like, I know I fought with my siblings all the time. My brothers and I, man, we would go at it. And I didn't really think about that until fairly recently, where my two daughters, and, you know, they're very cute and very sweet when they want to be, but they fight. And they go at it, and they try to murder each other sometimes. And I have to find myself, you know, refereeing the two and pulling them apart. And yeah, so I guess I was trying to make some sort of connection between sibling rivalry and fighting, but I really don't think there's much of a connection there, because I didn't learn how to fight squabbling with my brothers. I still sucked at fighting. And yeah, my kids aren't really learning anything from fighting with each other, although my older daughter, I have been training her in martial arts for quite some time. Her younger sister started to fight with her. She got behind her, took the back, got her hooks in, did not go for a rear naked choke, fortunately, because I don't think she really knows how to control her power like an adult, but she took the back and held her sister down, and her sister started screaming, "Let me out of here! Let me out of here! When I got out of here, I'm going to claw your eyes out." So
sounds like another someone we know.
Yeah,
I know. Go for the eyes.
But I was happy to see that my daughter was using a Jiu Jitsu position to use non-lethal, non-damaging force against her sister to prevent this attack from escalating into something worse. I'm sure Henry Gracie would would be like, look, Gracie Jiu Jitsu in action, even among the toddlers.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, that's definitely. There are always people who, when you spar with them, they're not very good at going light, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
they just can't seem to grasp what that means. They think they might know, but they don't know. And no matter how many times you tell them, it just doesn't get any better. And I think at those circumstances are when I take the opportunity to just focus on grappling, because the option when someone's like coming at you hard and sparring is like, I can take your head off, but I don't really want to hurt you that much. So if you just focus on grappling, you can just like work covering your head, work the positions, work the takedowns. So grappling is great for not murdering people. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, light technical sparring where both guys are getting something out of it is a very high level skill in martial arts. I don't think people really understand that. It's a very high level skill. It takes a great deal of and a great investment of time to get to that level where you're able to do it. But I think it also takes actual fight experience. It takes the contrast between being in full contact fighting and not to be able to understand that level of sparring. In fact, the best guys at sparring that I know, the guys who I would trust to spar with my daughters.
Yeah.
They are some of the most experienced fighters, some of the most badass, capable fighters, capable of knocking your head out and strangling you in 20 different ways in any position. And the reason I think they are so good at controlling their power is because they understand it. Whereas I think if you want to get good at self-defense against a wild, crazy, uncontrolled, untrained person, just spar with white belts, for example. Go to a jiu-jitsu class and spar
absolutely.
with the white. Yeah, because they won't follow the rules. They'll try to bite you. They'll scratch you. They'll kick you. They'll knee in the groin. They'll headbutt you. They just will because they don't know how to not do that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think one of the best ways to get used to, like, if you want to be able to pacify someone without significantly injuring them, one of the best ways to do that is fight someone who's inexperienced, because a lot of the time they just freak out and do the craziest, most dangerous crap. And I'm just like, dude, like, watch the power, man. You're going to take my head off. But they don't know how to watch the power. So it's just like, all right, my only option is to close the distance and just like grapple with you, because the alternative is like, knock you out, which I'm not a fan of. So inexperienced people are great for that. Yeah.
Yeah, man, this is something I'll see all the time at the gym when you guys come in. They want to spar with the other new guys, and I'm like, not yet. Let's have you spar with the pro fighters. And they're like, but I want to win. I'm like, that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
This guy can take care of you. This guy can work around you. That guy is going to injure you, and you're going to injure him.
Yeah.
So, man, it is so important to have guys at your gym who understand that level of control. Like, have you ever sparred with Muay Thai fighters from Thailand? Like
Not
Thais
from Thailand,
specifically.
No.
Yeah, man, it's interesting. The first time I sparred with a Muay Thai fighter from Thailand, this dude was a Lumpini Boxing Stadium champion. Man, I heard them. Side note, I heard they're closing the new Lumpini Boxing Stadium because of COVID. It might go under for good, unfortunately. But, man, he was a Lumpini Boxing Stadium champion, and he wanted to spar with me. And I was thinking, oh, crap, he's going to kill me. This dude's going to knock my head off. He's going to cut me open with his elbows. I've seen him fight. He's a monster. And he's like, no, play in the ring, I'm like, what do you mean by play in the ring? And he said, punch, kick, elbow, knee, clinch. And I was like, oh, okay, fine, I'll spar with you. So I get in there expecting a fight. And then he just starts going, bah, 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 just touching me with his gloves, touching me with his kicks, just touching me with the ball of his foot for the teeps and all this stuff. And when he clinches, just being very gentle, in control, absolute control, but very gentle, like no damage whatsoever. And I sparred with him for a full hour. And I walked away from that feeling amazing, like, wow, I learned so much about Muay Thai in that 1 hour, more than I've ever learned in any Muay Thai class. and I have no injuries, and I could do that again tomorrow.
Right, exactly.
And that was a life-changing experience for me. So,
Yeah.
man, I would recommend everybody needs to spar with a guy like that.
Yeah, I think
everybody needs to become a guy like that.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most important things with training is sustainability, and you can't go, 100% getting a concussion every single training session, because you might feel hard at first, but give it a couple of weeks and probably not so much.
Yeah, and at the same time, sometimes we do need to add certain levels of intensity to it, which is why I'm going to circle back to your sparring videos, because some of those are super intense.
Yes.
Now, I know, like, a lot of times we're wearing, like, certain protective equipment and so on, but the sparring level is very intense. And what kind of safety measures do you take to avoid serious injuries while doing sparring at that intensity?
Yeah, so it's important to note, we only train at that intensity probably once every 2 to 3 months. So it's definitely not like that every single time. That's more of just a way to... We've formulated kind of a bunch of theories that work under moderate pressure, but now we need to see how do they actually do when someone's trying to kill you. As far as safety measures, obviously you have mouth guards, shin pads, groin guards, head guards. When we can, elbow pads. The floor is padded, the walls are padded, the furniture is padded. So there's pads everywhere. There's not a overly large risk of actual fractures because of the head guards. So that's about all the safety precautions we take. I'm not sure what more one could do. But we definitely don't train like that 24/7. A lot of the sparring we do is a lot lighter than that. I definitely don't want to give the illusion that that's how you should be training all the time. You should do it sometimes, but not most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. All right. Looks like we're going on about 2 hours here.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time flies, Matt. Time flies.
I hope my green screen's been okay in the back there. It's kind of not well lit, and I'm using my phone as a flashlight to light my face here. So I hope it turns out all right.
No worries. We will make it work, man. We will make it work.
Sweet.
That's a great trick, man. I got like a studio light up here, and you got
Yeah, I'm just holding.
That's awesome, man.
So
YouTube hacks.
ghetto tricks, yeah.
Man, we should do a whole video on YouTube hacks. You don't need to spend a lot of money to make good YouTube videos.
No.
My most popular YouTube videos I filmed on an old iPhone 4, and I didn't use any external microphones or lighting or anything. It was just, and none of it was scripted or anything like that. It almost seems like the less effort I put into a video, the more success it seemed to have.
Yeah.
Whereas, I've made some videos where I've invested tons of time and effort and resources into putting it out there, and nobody watches it, and that's just all kinds of disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then again, sometimes a year later it goes viral, and you never know what's going to happen.
Which is the great thing about YouTube. I think, if the one thing that applies to YouTube that doesn't apply to a lot of other mechanisms that people watch things on, like Instagram or whatever, is with YouTube, every video you put up is an asset. Every video can be discovered later on. But with TikTok, for example, you get that window and then it's gone. Same with Instagram Reels and stuff like that. So YouTube is unique in that regard. And I think if anyone's thinking about getting started, you just got to do it, man. Don't worry about buying $1 million worth of equipment. Just put yourself out there and you'll get better naturally the more you do it.
Yeah, man. I get asked this all the time, what equipment should I buy? What equipment do you use for YouTube videos? I want to be just like you. And if you want to be just like me as far as YouTube goes, just speak your mind, go through the process of learning how to do this stuff, because you're going to suck for a long time until you get better.
Yeah.
And why spend a whole bunch of money sucking when you can adapt and learn and figure out who you are and what you want to be, and then gradually, maybe put some resources into augmenting that instead of trying to replace who you are with money and buy your way to the top. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, content is king. Have good video ideas, make the videos, and then worry about the fancy stuff later.
Yeah. So, Matt, speaking of videos, tell our viewers where we can find you on the internet.
Yeah, good idea. So if you would like to find me, you can go to Reality Check Self-Defense on YouTube. And I should be the first channel that pops up. I do videos that test ridiculous self-defense techniques, and I put out some self-defense techniques of my own with a little bit of humor. I try to ease that in there. So Reality Check Self-Defense on YouTube.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt from Reality Check Self-Defense. And thank you for watching at home. I should probably ask before we end, Matt, is there anything else you want to talk about before we close?
Oh, what's your favorite food?
Oh, man, that's a good question. My favorite food has changed a lot over the years. Man, when there was a dish that they make in Argentina, cannellones, which in Italian, cannelloni, but it's different than the pasta version that they make in Italy. Yeah, the Argentinian version, it's made with crepes. And,
oh, yeah, nice. I love crepes.
Yeah, it's crepes, and it's filled with cheese and like pasta sauce and meat and stuff like that, and it's amazing, man. I love Argentinian food, and I'll tell you why. It's like everything that's great about Italian cuisine, and there's a lot that's great about Italian cuisine. And oh man, this is probably going to bring us on a whole nother thing. You're a vegan, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, and I totally respect that, and I also eat meat, and in Argentina, man, the major food group is beef, because it is, the whole country is like a giant grass plain, and so they have like more grass-fed cows than anywhere, just free-range grass-fed cows. It's man, if only every other beef industry in the world was able and capable and willing to do what they do as far as raising beef there, I think it would solve so many problems. But man, it's the best beef in the world. It really is. So they take everything that's great about Italian food, and then they put the best beef in the world on it, which, in my opinion, just makes it so much better. But man, which I know I'm saying this to a vegan, which is probably like, I don't know where I'm going with this. Let's talk about veganism for a minute. Why not?
Yeah, sure.
Why not? I mean, not to have a debate rather than say what's better or not, but yeah, you've talked about this a little bit on your channel. You mentioned like a tattoo that you have, something about like doing no harm. Can you tell us a little bit about your philosophy behind why you're a vegan, why you have that tattoo, and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's really quite a simple story, to be honest. My journey towards veganism is I simply watched some slaughterhouse footage of a pig slaughterhouse, came up on Facebook. I watched it. I shared it to my Facebook page, and I basically said, this is really messed up and brutal, and I hate this. And my friend commented saying, if you care, you should go vegan. And I was just like, all right, I guess that makes sense. And now I've just been vegan for 7 years. So that's really the story. In relation to philosophy, I guess, the more I dig into the industries, like, the more I decide I don't want to support it, and hence the tattoo. That's ahimsa, which is like a Hindi kind of principle. And I try to obey by doing no harm as much as I possibly can, which food choices are a big portion of that for me. So
yeah. And that's not being a vegan myself. That is a principle I think is really important. If people would ask some questions like, where does your food come from? Is this something I would be willing to kill myself or not? People would make more conscientious decisions, not just about diet, but that our diet, what we spend money on, it affects the world around us. Like, these horrible factory farms and all of this stuff, they exist because there is a demand for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, again, when we take conscientious effort, it can shape our demands. So these are very important questions for everybody to ask themselves. I got a question for you about 7 years as a vegan. That's probably one of the longest term vegans I've met.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because generally I meet vegans and it's like 5 years or less. So I have to ask you, do you take nutritional supplements?
So the only supplement I do take is vitamin B12, and that's simply due to the fact that a lot of people should be taking that, and if we're getting it through our food, a lot of the time, the animals that we consume are getting a vitamin B12 supplement either through their feed or through a direct injection as well. So most people take it. I just take it from a can, from a little spray thing under my tongue. But other than that, like, I don't do protein shakes. I don't do like vitamin D supplements or anything like that. So B12 once a day. That's about it.
Yeah. Oh man, I just noticed Australians say vitamin instead of vitamin, like the.
Right. Yeah.
Because I have always said vitamin my whole entire life. I've always said vitamin because I grew up in a British household, but in America, and I changed the way I pronounced a lot of words over time, but vitamin was never one of those, and that's a word I got beaten up for in school. Man, people would be like, "What did you just say?" I'd say, "Vitamin." I said vitamin. They'd be like, "Let's beat the British out of you. Go back to your own country. I've never been there. I'm an American." Anyway, and that's how I got into martial arts.
Well, hey, I guess in that case, I'm glad you say vitamin. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now.
Exactly, man. That one word made all the difference.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why I still say it like the British. And my kids make fun of me because my wife is American, and they tend to emulate her more than me because children love their mother more than their father. So it's just the way it is. And yeah, man, they're like, "Daddy, why do you say that? Why do you say vitamin? It's not vitamin, it's vitamin." So we were talking about veganism or something for a minute there.
Yeah, I'm one of the longest term vegans that you've known. That's where we're at.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So
yeah, I have a couple of friends that are 20 years plus. So I'm quite low ranked in my peer group.
Well, that's fantastic. If it's working out for you, and more power to you.
Yeah.
All right.
2 minutes and 10 seconds. 2 hours and 10 minutes. Jeez.
2 hours and 10 minutes. Oh man,
session.
I gotta be skedaddling here. But Matt, thank you very, very much for making the time to talk with me today. And for the folks at home, thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.
Hey fella, looks like you could use a rash guard. What for, you say? Well, they protect your skin against mat-borne illnesses, mat burn, and they make you look incredibly cool. But where do I get a rash guard from? Hey, have you heard of xmartial.com? Yeah? Then what are you waiting for? Check them out right now. xmartial.com has all kinds of rash guards, from sleek and simple, novelty, badass designs, and more. Channel your inner Japanese cartoon rat monster. Express your love for bad puns and kitty cats doing iconic Jiu Jitsu moves. Hey, that panda's gonna hit the other panda with a folding chair like a pro wrestler. And this one makes your right arm stand out. NoGiBJJGear.com is now xmartial.com, serving your needs beyond just no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, find brand new equipment for mixed martial arts, kickboxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, and more at xmartial.com. As always, use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off everything on the website. Once again, that's xmartial.com. Rash guards, spats, shorts, and more. Links and discount codes in the description below.